Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Essential Works by Composer X for Beginners. And Composer X is Schubert. Now, Schubert is really one of the most interesting guys when you're just beginning, because Schubert was a songwriter, and most people's encounters with music of all kinds starts, at least, in the form of songs. And as I have said many times, there is no difference between a song written yesterday and one written in the 12th century. They are all the same, fundamentally. I mean, the stylistics of the different eras, of course, they didn't have electric guitars, they didn't have drum sets, and people don't use like lutes and theorbos now. But the truth is, a song is a song, usually something in several verses, mostly about love or women or guys or, lack of love or needing love or wanting love or despairing of love or, and then there are things that can be other topics as well. And that's where Schubert comes in, because Schubert wrote a billion songs about love and lost love, and huge songs, important songs about those things, but also songs about all kinds of other stuff. He set just about, every different type of German poetry he could get his paws on. And he wrote, 600 and some odd songs, like a lot of songs. And remember, he was only like 29 or something when he died, 28, 29, something like that. I mean, it was amazing, absolutely amazing what he accomplished. And or he died in 28 or 29 and he was 30. I don't know. But he was young. And he wrote tons and tons and tons of stuff. And I think one of the best ways to get to know Schubert is this way that I'm going to tell you about, which is relating the songs to his works in larger media. Because that not only gives you the songs, but it gives you a wonderful entree into those works in larger media. So where do we start? Well, we have to start with what is possibly his most iconic single song. It's called Erlkönig in German, or the Elf King. It tells a story. It tells a story about a man riding on his horse through the night with his sick child, desperate to get home to try and help the kid or do something, whatever he's going to do. But he's trying to get home with his sick child. And the child is hallucinating. He has a fever, and he sees the Elf King wanting to take him away to the land of Elfia, which of course means death. And so it's an amazing song. First of all, it has this fabulous motive, which was very famous from cartoons from the Warner Brothers era. Boom boom. That motive. You hear it in all kinds of popular things that were done in that period. But in any case, the singer has to interpret at least 4 characters in this song. There's a narrator, there's the father, there's the child, and there's the Elf King. And it's really quite something, because it's an amazing challenge for any singer to try and characterize these different people. It's a wonderful little scene. And of course, eventually the father gets home, and by the time he gets home, the child is dead. It's terribly, terribly tragic and really powerful and marvelous. Now, this is actually not a song solely for male singers. There have been fabulous performances by female singers. One of the greatest exponents of this song was Marian Anderson, who had a quirky voice, to say the least. She was sort of an alto, but she had, high notes. And when she was in her prime, she could do 4 different characters. I mean, she really could, and including the guys. I mean, it was really, really fascinating to listen to her sing it. And it's probably on YouTube. You can hear all of these songs very easily on YouTube, often with scores, with translations. It's a wonderful, wonderful way to get into this stuff. So start with Erlkönig. And you'll notice in the list, I have put the D number so you know what you're getting. The D number stands for Deutsch. Mr. Deutsch put together Schubert's catalog. So all of his pieces have Deutsch numbers that help you to identify them, and they do come in handy with Schubert. So Erlkönig is Deutsch number 328, which means that there were 327 Deutsch numbers before we got to 328, and it's smack dab in the middle of Schubert's career. He actually gets up to 900 and something in Deutsch numbers, but this really occurs in his middle maturity. I think he was 18 when he wrote it. And it's one of his first great, acknowledged masterpieces. It's an extraordinary song. The next song is Der Wanderer. The Wanderer. We know what that means, right? It's a slow, gloomy, philosophical kind of song. But the reason I include Der Wanderer is because it has a companion, separate instrumental work, the Wanderer Fantasy for piano. So the Wanderer is Deutsch 489, and the Wanderer Fantasy it's also Fantasy in C major, Deutsch 760, I think is that one. I hope I got all these numbers right. But the Wanderer Fantasy is based entirely on the song, The Wanderer. It's very specifically in its slow movement, which Schubert uses the song melody for a series of variations. But the whole piece is thematically linked and therefore thematically related to the song, sped up in considerable point because there are 3 quick movements and 1 slow one, whereas the song is largely deliberate in tempo. But the Wanderer Fantasy is essentially a 4-movement symphonic type piece, although for solo piano, but has the 4 movements of a symphony, an opening allegro, quick movement, a slow movement, a scherzo, which is quite zippy, and a finale, which has a devilish contrapuntal fugue thing toward the end, where all the voices enter one after the other. Schubert himself thought he couldn't play it. He gave up trying to play it. It's his most difficult piano piece. It's brilliant and fabulous and just an endless source of musical joy. And it will tell you a little bit how Schubert was able to work in large forms using his song melodies as some of his basic materials, because even when he's not quoting actual songs, his inspiration was innately lyrical and song-like. In other words, he wrote great tunes, really great tunes. And great tunes are not always the best thing for large-scale works if you want to develop and expand and extend, because the thing with a great tune is that all you can do with it really is repeat it. And if you want to do other things with it, you're likely to get disappointed because you're like, oh, why isn't he playing the tune again? It's so beautiful. Why don't we just get to hear the tune? Or the great tune functions as a self-contained unit within what purports to be a larger whole. And that could be a problem because you're wondering what the larger whole is doing there when you have, all of these self-contained units, which are just lovely in and of themselves. And they don't add up to a continuous and powerful statement that has a sort of goal or direction. But Schubert was able to overcome this in his best work, and he does it using these wonderful, wonderful tunes in all kinds of ways. So listening to these pieces is really going to be a wonderful sort of training thing, not just to enjoy amazing music full of spiritual depth and expressive profundity, which it is, but also in terms of all of your other listening. It really, really is good for you. In the best sense, because it's enjoyable while it's good for you. So we get the Wanderer Fantasy and the Wanderer the song. The next song is called The Trout, Die Forelle. It's about a trout. Hi, I'm a fish. I'm a trout. Oh, I'm fishing along. It's delightful. Well, Schubert used this song as the source of theme and variations in the slow movement of his Trout Quintet. Now, this is a wonderful piece, but it's not a typical piano quintet, which is usually piano plus string quartet. This thing has a piano and then a violin, a viola, a cello, and a double bass. A double bass to put some real bottom on the sound of the ensemble. It's almost more serenade-like, meaning more relaxed in terms of its form. It's jolly and fun to listen to, and it has 5 movements. It's got some extra movements in there than you normally find in a symphony, so it's long, and another one of the most famous pieces of chamber music anyone ever wrote. Now, you need to keep in mind, Schubert had virtually no opportunities to have his works performed outside of his domestic circle of friends, and so he didn't write a lot of orchestral music. The fact that he wrote as much as he did is kind of amazing, considering how, he was never going to get any attention as a composer of big symphonies and other orchestral pieces. He wrote operas, he wrote all these things. But in order to be heard, he had to focus on songs and chamber works and piano works, solo piano works. So that's what most of his output consists of. And so you have to, not worry so much about the orchestral aspect. But in all other respects, especially his handling of big forms, Schubert was big He had lots of notes. His forms are huge. His large works are long and extravagant and expressively very, very powerful. He was on the cusp between classical and romantic music. He was essentially a classical composer, but expressively he's dripping over the line there and heading into the Romantic era. And we will hear this, after the Trout Quintet in a moment. But right now, let's do a symphony. So the next work is his Symphony No. 5. This is one of his early works. He had actually, when he was a school teacher in his earlier life, he wrote symphonies in the style of Mozart and Haydn, for the most part, his first 6 of them. And they are lovely works in a somewhat stiff but charming classical style, full of good tunes. And the 5th is the most beautiful of all of them. It's transparently based on Mozart's G minor symphony, although this is a major key symphony. It's for strings and winds. It doesn't have trumpets. It doesn't have timpani. It's beautiful and elegant and sexy and just lovely. And everybody who hears it falls in love with it. It's one of those pieces that even if you're not absolutely dazzled by it, because it's a modest piece, it really is. You're going to hear that opening tune, da 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 da, ya da 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 da. It just glides, and it's just the whole symphony's like that. It's incredibly beautiful, and you should give it a shot and listen to it in comparison to Mozart's G minor symphony. Da da dum ba da dum ba da 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 da. You hear the tunes are all different, the keys are all different, but you hear the similarity. You hear that the vocally inspired melodic basis of the entire thing. That's really what it comes down to. So after Symphony No. 5, which is Deutsch 485, by the way, we get another fabulous song, Death and the Maiden. Oh, yes. This is one of those classic romantic style confrontations between a maiden, and death, who, of course, like the Erlkönig, wants to suck her off to Deathland. And they're having a conversation. And it's quite spooky. And it's lots of fun. Well, Death and the Maiden became the theme of a set of variations in the slow movement of Schubert's 14th String Quartet, which is unbelievable piece of music. It's a late work. It's Deutsch 810. The song is Deutsch 531, and it's called the Death and the Maiden String Quartet, which is how you recognize these things. It's also Quartet number 14 in D minor, and it's an amazingly powerful piece of string quartet writing. Schubert's string quartets actually are remarkably colorful pieces. There's a whole pile of them. There's 15 of them that he finished, and a bunch of separate movements and bits and fragments, because Schubert was a mess. He just kept writing and writing and writing, and sometimes he would give up, and sometimes he'd finish it, and none of it got published, or very little got published in his lifetime. So you have to sort of get used to this idea of a life cut short in his music, because it's reflected in the physical condition in which he left it. Well, Death and the Maiden is finished, and it's oh my goodness, it is a dance of death in many respects, especially in the last couple of movements. And the closing movement, which is kind of like a tarantella thing, and almost Italianate, but really, really cool. The tunes are, again, amazing, but what is even more amazing is just how powerful the music is and how big it is. Big in scope and intent. I keep saying, chamber music, just because it's for small forces, that doesn't mean small music. The forms are large, and they are nowhere larger than with Schubert. And Death and the Maiden is one of those great pieces that shows that quite eloquently, and you'll love the song too. It's really cool. So after that, we'll do another symphony, his most famous. It's the Unfinished Symphony. As I said, a lot of Schubert is fragmentary. Only 2 movements. He didn't write the rest of them. There's been endless speculation about, maybe some of his theatrical music or incidental music was actually the rest of the Unfinished Symphony. He did start to draft a scherzo, a 3rd movement, which he gave up. And all we have are these 2 movements. They weren't discovered until decades after Schubert died. I mean, Schubert died around, like I said, the late 1820s. And he was 31, I guess, 30. I don't pay attention to details like that, and neither should you, frankly. I mean, you will see in your wandering about the classical world people who are just absolute encyclopedias of useless and uninteresting facts that have nothing to do with music. I mean, I know roughly what they are, and if I wanted to look them up in advance for these talks, I could. If you wanted to know he died on this date at this time, go look it up yourself. Anyway, so the Unfinished Symphony only popped up around the 1860s. I mean, 30 years or so after he died, and it immediately entered the repertoire of the universe. It became immediately popular. It has that amazing second theme. It has words that people made up to remember what it is. This is the symphony that Schubert never finished. Right? I mean, you may have heard that, or, well, now you have, if you haven't. It is just incredibly beautiful. Again, full of wonderful lyrical melody, but also really powerful. The first movement is scary. It's a scary, atmospheric piece, full of brooding melancholy and moody, desperation. And then the second movement is the complete opposite. It's lyrical and yearning and a love song in a way, at least parts of it. Then there's like a march, but for the most part, really, really extraordinarily fabulous music that you won't be able to get out of your head. And there's another symphony that came later, the ninth, called the Great C Major, which is like an hour long. It's big, it's huge. Get to it when you have a chance. I mean, you don't need to do it right away. Now, the numbering of these last two symphonies is an issue. We call them 8 and 9. You may see them referred to as 7 and 8, or 7 and 9, or 6 and 3, or 2 and 1, because Schubert, there's no number 7. That's the bottom line. Schubert actually drafted a number 7. I mean, he never numbered anything. It was just a symphony in whatever key. And he didn't orchestrate it. And there are fragments and bits of symphonies and things that you could cobble together and make like several more if you were really inspired to do that. But as a result of that, there's been sort of a renumbering. So you might see it like listed as Symphony number 8, parenthesis 7, or 7, parenthesis 8, or 9, parenthesis, I don't know. It's just an ungodly mess. So just call it the Unfinished Symphony, and you're in great shape. And it's also Deutsch 759, if that's helpful. Although even some of the Deutsch numbers were updated as the chronology changed. So you get parenthetical Deutsch numbers and things. It's like, it's such a pain in the neck. I mean, it's like they never do these things to make it easy for us, the listeners, to actually listen. Finally, last but not least, we come to one of the all-time transcendental, unbelievable masterpieces in the history of Western music. It is not based on a song. It is a chamber work. It's Schubert's String Quintet in C major, Deutsch 956. Note the number. It is one of the last pieces that he wrote. One of his very last pieces, and from the slow movement, you can tell he already has one foot in the other world. I mean, it is an unbelievable piece of music. I can only say that. I can't prove it. You have to listen to it and get into its world, and you'll hear exactly what I have in what I'm saying. Most likely, I mean, maybe it won't strike you immediately. It's ambitious. It lasts about 50 minutes or more, depending on how you deal with repeats. And you have to be able to sit and just listen and focus on the thing. And it's an experience like no other in all of music. Even, if you look at I've done videos on these pieces, most of these pieces, not the songs, but the other major works, the large works, and particularly this quintet, and you should read the comments just about what people have to say about this piece. This is a work that is held in reverence by anybody who cares about chamber music. You don't mess around with the Schubert C major quintet. You just don't. It's that big a deal. And I don't say that to be intimidating. I'm saying that to whet your appetite, to get you to look forward to the experience, to tackling this masterpiece, which really you have all the tools you need to enjoy, and I'm sure you will when you hear it. So that's Schubert in 10 examples that make I think a really terrific introduction for new listeners and people new to Schubert, who can be a tough composer to get into, because first of all, there's tons of stuff, and there's tons of stuff in media that a lot of us wouldn't normally make the focus of our musical attention in the classical realm. Songs, of course, in popular music, but in the classical realm, it's a whole nother world. So give this list a crack and see if it helps you. I really am very confident that it will, and I'm also very confident that you are going to fall in love with this music, because it is to die for. I mean, figuratively. Anyway, keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me, and take care.